Let's turn to exploring the Shema, discussions on the issues of Trinity. Let's pick up where we left off. We've been working our way through a section in my commentary, point number 7, entitled, of paper 3, entitled, Who or What is the Holy Spirit? Revisiting the Holy Spirit passages from paper 2. And there are a list of verses as I scroll down to my commentaries. You're going to encounter them. There are a list of verses that are under the label of Holy Spirit, and we can see titles and attributes and names and actions that describe a passage, right? And we're focusing on the Holy Spirit. We're not looking exactly at the passages right now. We kind of dead-ended at, I think, the Holy Spirit sanctifies right there in 1 Peter 1:2. And then I decided to jump into this excursus material. I first looked at Paul's letter to the book of Romans, chapter 8, where Paul uses this language of Holy Spirit, Spirit. The Greek word would be pneuma or pneuma, however you've been taught to pronounce it. And we've been working from that material where we did like a little mini excursus just on Romans chapter 8. And then from there, I decided to pull in this commentary from a Christian gentleman by the name of Roberto Pereira, who wrote this commentary on the Spirit of God in Paul's writings. And now we're in this commentary, and we're reading through this. It's a like short little essay, and I'm reading through some of his notes. And so we're now ready to pick up this commentary, his commentary again, in this paragraph entitled "The Three Are God." So let me just pick up where he left off and keep reading. He writes, although it's not difficult to notice that the first theologian of the New Testament era describes the Spirit and the Son as fully God, there are those who argue against the divinity of the Holy Spirit. Let me pause and interject. On a regular basis, I interact via email and YouTube comments with non-Trinitarian folks. Some of them are believers, some of them are not believers. Many of them are just simply non-Trinitarian. This includes many Unitarians or Christadelphians, Jehovah's Witnesses, Iglesia Ni Cristo. Some people I can't identify what religious denomination they affiliate with. They don't tell me, even though I ask them. All I can tell is that they're non-Trinitarian. And the way I can tell is by the way they interact with my own material, my own YouTube videos. They object to my presentation of God as Trinity. And when it comes to discussing God the Father as tripart, right? A tripart God, tripersonal. It's not difficult to argue the case that God is one because of the heavy amount of verses that show up in the Old Testament speaking of God's oneness. So when we get to the New Testament and Jesus is introduced into the picture, that we have to start arguing about, is God one, is he three, et cetera, because is Jesus God? Likewise, when we turn to the topic of the second person of the Trinity, that actually occupies the bulk of apologetic discussions of God's oneness versus his threeness. It's because of the introduction of Jesus into history that we're even having this discussion really about the oneness and the threeness of God. At least that's my perspective, my take on the whole discussion in the first place. It's because of Jesus' actions, his words, and what Paul wrote about Jesus afterwards, after Jesus left, that the whole notion of, how are we to understand God? What I'm trying to imply is that if you only read the Tanakh, the Old Testament, you don't get a heavy dose of Trinitarian dialogue thrown in your face. It's only until you start reading through the New Testament and the words of Jesus and the words of Paul that you start contemplating this idea of a complex tripersonal God. But when we get to the Holy Spirit, we end up with a bit of a quandary, a bit of a pickle for us Trinitarians. And the challenge is this: the Holy Spirit, by very nature, is his role in history and in salvation history is very kind of backseatish, very not in your face. Like, in other words, it's almost like the diametrical opposite of Yeshua.